Welcome to the Eye of Power podcast. I'm your host, Tom Dardick. But this podcast is not about me. It's about you and your power. It's time to claim yours. Today on the Eye of Power podcast, it's my great pleasure to welcome Jim Sponaugle to the show. You're going to find a wealth. So if you don't have one ready, get a piece of paper and something to write with, because there's a lot of wisdom that comes down the pipe through Jim's view. Jim is the Chief People Officer for Utz Brands. If you're in the Northeast, you probably know their products, but I don't know if they're worldwide or not, but I know they're a huge company and a very successful company and gone through changes. And so it takes leaders like Jim to go through changes and to survive some of the things and to adapt. We first met on a panel where we were talking about disruption, and that conversation was so good that I felt like it had to keep on going. And as a matter of fact, now I'm thinking about it, there was a question I was going to ask Jim that I forgot to ask. Based on something that he said during the panel, but maybe we'll have him on again sometime and I'll remember to ask him then. But anyway, phenomenal viewpoint. This is somebody who has walked the walk and is a person of tremendous maturity and tremendous wisdom. And buckle your seatbelts and listen to what Jim has to say about how we become aligned, how that works in an organization, how we navigate the challenges in the HR profession, how we perhaps inspire the best in the people around us. So as you know, if you've listened to Eye of Power before, this is exactly what we like to talk about. So welcome, Jim, to the show. So first, Jim, I want to thank you very much for joining me today. I was really looking forward to this conversation because we had such a great experience together on a panel where we were all kind of sharing some really great questions and some great discussions. And I just kept wanting that to keep going on. And I think the people in the audience felt the same way. So I was like, you got to come on our podcast so we can continue the discussion about, that one was about disruption and change in the workplace. And that's, of course, a great place for us to start too. But where I really want to start is your story and your vantage and how you got to be a chief people officer for a large company like Utz Brands. And let's just start with your sort of walk through and how you got to where you are right now, if you don't mind.
Yeah, happy to, Tom. And it's great to be here with you. And I agree that that panel was electric and was a really neat opportunity. Yeah. So Tom, my journey, I actually came into HR in a non-traditional way. And there's probably a lot of HR professionals that have that same opening. HR kind of finds you. In a way, I'm super excited to be in the domain of HR. It really, in essence, kind of pulls the leadership aspects that I loved in operations and allows me to work full time on those concepts.
Can I interject right there for a second? Because, there's a different sorts of views of the HR profession. It's obviously something that's needed, and it's a non-negotiable because, well, if we have an organization, we have people, and we have to deal with the people side of things. But a lot of times the profession gets a little short shrift. There's a lot of organizations where the top HR person is seen as sort of we got to have this person in on the meeting, or some fall guilty of maybe just checking the boxes and being sort of legalistic and not really fully embracing what the implications of people strategy really are. It's central to any shared mission. So, and I got that in Technicolor from you. So that was one thing that I really would guess, not knowing you that well, but I would guess that's, and probably coming from operations and so forth, that gave you that breadth of view that maybe a lot of HR, if you just start in HR and only know HR, you might not have. So anyway, I just wanted your reaction to that observation.
Yeah, Tom, I had the vantage point of 20 years in operations. So P&L responsibility, KPI responsibility, key performance indicators, driving results, leading teams, and loved that space and responsibility. General management, was kind of my path, and being able to go a mile wide and, a couple feet deep in all of the different functions of a business is what a good general manager can do and should be able to do. What I found during my career was I was typically underserved by the
Mhm.
HR function. And as an operator, you know, human resources, they would always say, "Hey, we're here to support you." And I'd say, "Great. And here are the things of which I need supported." And, invariably, to generalize, I was always typically underwhelmed with the level of support that I would get, which led to, me doing a lot of it on my own. So as it pertains to hiring, firing, crucial conversations, org design, organizational effectiveness, performance management, you know, spans and layers, all of the things that I think help drive a good company were things that I worked on and did as a general manager and as an operator. And I always had kind of in the back of my mind, wow, this is such a neat function if approached in a different way. And I was, so fortunate to have a great relationship with our current chairman, was CEO at the time over at Utz Brands. And him and I used to talk all the time and meet and just connect. And, I expressed this in different ways over the course of time. And we hatched this idea of saying, well, what if we put a reformed operator into the HR space? You know what it's like to be served well, you know what it's like to be underserved. And what if we could have somebody from, kind of a client perspective or customer perspective come in to be on the other side of that? And lo and behold, that's what in fact we did. And what ended up kind of being the catalyst was this particular domain and function, if approached from a leadership, culture driving, organizational development, and organizational effectiveness perspective, can be a force multiplier in a company.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the compliance, the regulations, the rules, that's certainly part of the function and part of, governance in a business. No problem. But it shouldn't end there. And I think in many companies and perhaps, in more of a traditional setting, that is what HR is kind of known to be. That's what the stereotype is known to be about. And what if we can expand beyond that? What if, in fact, human resources can truly be business strategist at the table that's helping bring people solutions to the table? We believe that HR is about understanding the business of human relations. You need to understand your own domain, but you also need to understand the business. You have to have business acumen to making the product, moving the product, selling the product. If you're in professional services, what is your service?
That leads a question to me. So, it's been a while. I kinda circle the HR world a little bit because of the, business I'm in, but, I've never really been sort of in the middle of it where I was trying to get certified as a professional or anything like that, and I'm wondering in the certification process, how much content is in the domain that you were just pointing to, Jim, where it's generalized business knowledge or organizational knowledge as much as it is, or at least not, maybe not as much as, but at least emphasized as an important component to being effective as an HR professional.
Yeah, I mean, I think, the function itself, I think, over the course of time has kind of fallen into perhaps maybe the niche it's in
Wow.
that's compliance oriented and kind of regulation oriented, likely, possibly due to the certification processes that tend to be more technical, tend to be more in that space. And that part of human resources is incredibly important. And you need to have that to have a well performing company and a well performing business. My push and the vision that we have at Utz and fortunately, our chairman, had and as we kind of launched this idea and now we're 6 years in.
6 years, I was gonna ask you that question, 6 years.
Yeah, 6 years in. So was it to say, yeah, that's good and you need that, of course. But what about the other components? What about, the things that we mentioned? What about the leadership side and the culture side of a business? And I think that HR truly, if you want to be a business strategist and be a business enabler, you need to be able to do both. You need to have both within your department. It may not be the same person. There's compliance kind of related, people that are really technically strong and good at that. And we have those and they're phenomenal. You have to have that. And then we also have people that are focused on the soft skills. They're focused on the leadership and cultural side of things, the OD and the OE work. And those two teams, really come together to form a department, which then allows, as I was saying before, this idea that you understand the business of HR, you understand the business of the company, and then you bring or strive to bring people solutions to the table through attracting, retaining, or engaging employees to help the operators solve their problems in the business. They've got to move product. They've got to make product. They've got to sell product. They've got to sell professional services. They've got to engage their clients. Whatever the business is, how does HR enable and unlock through people solutions? And since we need people to really drive any business in any capacity, in any domain, then how do we, as HR professionals, eat, sleep, and breathe, unlocking human potential, bringing humans and people solutions to the table, which take a variety of different outcomes, right? Hiring, engagement, leadership and development, all of those fall under this idea of maximizing business effectiveness and helping business operators solve problems in their business. So it's a fascinating work. And I get to spend 24/7 in that space. So I couldn't be happier.
That's awesome, Jim. As you lay all that out, I was thinking that there's a little bit analogous to the field of psychology, because forever, meaning going back to perhaps Freud or even before, where the field was trying to fix what's wrong. And so it's looking at, we have these crises, depression, anxiety, and focus on trying to alleviate the things that are wrong. And it's really only been about 30 years or so that the field has branched into going from okay to better than okay. And it seems like there might be something analogous here where, the legalistic aspect of it is the guardrails that define what's in and out of bounds as far as behavioral and how we treat people and those sorts of things. But within that playing field, we're starting to pay attention to how we can expand. When you say force multiplier, it's like, okay, you're happy, you're doing okay, you get good reviews, we don't expect to lose you anytime soon. But are you really feeling fulfilled? Are you really working in a calling rather than just getting a paycheck and working there? And I kind of got the sense that your mind is more like in that space just as much, if not more, than the legalistic side of things. Am I reading that right?
You are. Yeah, I love that, Tom. I love that thread too, because, they've studied this, people smarter than I, that say the drivers that help you go from dissatisfied to not dissatisfied are different drivers that take you
Yes,
from neutral to satisfied.
that's right.
And so it's fascinating to kind of say, all right, comp, benefits, rules, policy, hygiene, that gets you from dissatisfied to neutral. Okay. But then the drivers to really take you from neutral to I'm fully engaged and fulfilled, career pathing, purpose, impact, clarity, culture, employee value proposition, all these other cool drivers, you know?
I just saw you light up, and I'm lighting up too because this is what I'm passionate about, right? It's the best in human experience, not just the mailing it in kind of thing that unfortunately too much of our time is spent that way as a human experience as a overall. And, it's emergent because when we're in survival mode, when we don't have resources, we revert to where's my next meal coming from, or who are my people, or those sort of level one kinds of issues. And as we take care of those things, then we can aim higher. So my next line of questioning, and I know we didn't get too much into your personal story, which is
Yeah,
we talked a little bit, and I don't want to neglect that. So if you can weave that into this next line, please do.
for sure.
But what I'm really wanting to do is pick your brain about what we were just pointing to in terms of the things that you see that do kind of expand, and maybe you've seen some people blossom into a more beautifully expressed version of themselves, and what were the causes of that, or the circumstances that helped create that. If you've seen that, or however terms you think about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've been fortunate enough to see that, and that's what we strive for, really. I mean, that's kind of our end game for any department and any people, any person that we're working with, is to find that unlock and that blossom where they're starting to realize their full potential. I, you know, a lot that goes into that. It's kind of a concept that everyone can get their mind wrapped around, but then the execution is always a little more complex than the simplicity of the concept. And one of the things that I think has been a really fun part of the journey for me is, and probably because of the reform, well, I know because of the being a reformed operator, taking all of the HR concepts that float around that tend to be, career pathing and strategic workforce development and unlocking potential and some of the more conceptual things, jargon that you hear. How do you take those and actually operationalize them in your business? Like, yeah, we all want to do that. Great. What do we do tomorrow that's going to be different than what we did yesterday? How do we actually take the step forward? And
So
from
what are a
people's
couple answers to that question?
Yeah. So from people's potential, a huge part of this is you have to get to know the person and have that conversation and have a really cadenced, simple feedback loop, right? And it doesn't even need to be overly manufactured. It is 3 to 4 to 5 key questions that you give people ahead of time, allow them time for reflection, allow them time to talk to a couple people that they work with and trust, and then come back and say, this is what I really want to do. This is how I really think I can contribute. This is what I really think I'm good at. This is what, and how I think I can impact the business. And you go, okay. And based on people's towering strengths, how can they fit in that function that they happen to be working in? And how does then their role and their role design fit around the towering strengths? And how do you help them leverage what they're strongest in to be able to impact their job and their career in the most profound way that they can? And it's super fascinating to do. And what people, I think, say when I lay that out is, well, great. What if their job is to do, these 10 things and they say, I hate all those 10 things and my towering strengths are these 3 things. Okay. Well, let's say that's the scenario. Then you have a couple options as an employer, right? You can say, well, that's interesting. There's a misalignment to what you really are good at and what you like to do to the job that we gave you.
Right.
Left unaddressed, that person likely will not work in that job for the next 10 years. Organically on its own, that person will likely leave you. So now what a gift. You've got an early indicator that you've got a misaligned person. If that person's actually a good culture fit, they're a good worker, they were just in the wrong job. Well, now you've just got the key information to go find the right fit within your organization.
I wonder in general how much of a cost that is, that misalignment you just pointed to, Jim, where people are just sort of quietly going along. I know, I had a white paper come out not long ago where I was studying the Gallup worldwide engagement that they do. Deloitte does something similar, that they all kind of try to say, okay, and the results are always, to me, very eye-opening. Is worldwide, it's only 1 in 5 people are actually engaged in their work. Like feeling the way that we're pointing to here. And I often wonder, like, wow, that just now it's never going to be 100, right? That's not human
Yeah.
beings. But it seems to me like it could be switched, where it's four are engaged and we have that one that's sort of in transition that's finding their way. And I think that's true because I think there are organizations that have a ratio closer to that, and it's a function of leadership, really, is what it comes down to, in the ways that you were just laying out, I believe. So you said a couple things there that I'm smiling ear to ear because it's part and parcel of what we found out at the Mentor Machine, and it's part of what we do. Exactly. When you say towering strengths, you have to. We found through experience that if you want people to really blossom and live into themselves, you have to give them that lever. They don't see themselves the way they could see themselves, right? They're going to listen to the criticism that their teacher or their parent or their peer gave them and have that self-doubt, and then they're going to protect against those things, and now we're going to not listen with both ears open because we're afraid of that kind of criticism, and then our strengths get ignored or at least not leveraged as much as they could. And that's one of the things that I'm sure you're pointing to, where it's like when people see those towering strengths and then they have the opportunity to spread those wings and apply them, what a delta between the previous and that really is that blossoming we're talking about, right?
Yeah. 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 And you touch on something that's interesting too, that I think, underpins a lot of this. And that's that self-identity. You had mentioned, kind of the early criticisms in life and how people then build walls and how people view themselves versus how they could be viewed, and how oftentimes people outside of their themselves view them. And, where I truly believe, like, our self identity is our thermostat, and I didn't create that metaphor, that's Maxwell Maltz, in 1960, cybernetics. I mean, it's if the room temperature is set at 72 and it's a hot day out and the temperature gets to 73, 74, 75, the air conditioner kicks on and it's going to barometer it down to 72. If
Yeah.
it's cold, the heat's going to kick on. And people's self identity often sets the room temperature to where they're going to go in an organization. So to help people re-identify is the ultimate. You won't always get that and get that deep with folks, but to help people understand what's possible oftentimes takes a lot of, encouragement and takes a lot of conversation to help people see, like, hey, you are actually self-identify as being strong here and here, but I also see this, this, and this. And
So
helping them kind of bridge that gap, right?
yeah, so I think we're pointing in the good direction, and I get the sense from you that that's where your passion and energy goes. So I'm sure, without again, I don't know anything, but it seems to me like it's probably true that that filters into the Utz Brands organization, and you do see the effects of that. But you're dealing with people, you're dealing with the real world. Everybody faces what I call the tyranny of the to-do list, right? So we get busy, and then we lose sight of these things that we're pointing to. So my next kind of thing that I'd like to get your view on is what gets in the way. Where does energy get blocked? Where are the things that you see that there are opportunities that if you had that sort of magic wand, what would you change in order to kind of let more of this stuff that we're talking about happen in the world?
Yeah, I think from a practicality perspective, you know, if someone's listening to now, they're like, okay, that all sounds great, but we have jobs to do and we have to-do lists and we can't custom make everyone's job around the things that they love to do. And all fair comments, the practicality and application is this in my mind and what we've practiced, helping people understand what they like to do, what they're good at, what they want to do, how they want to impact, how they want to show up, what gets their fire lit. Having those conversations, again, aren't terribly complex to do. There's questions, there's introspection, and it's a conversation. Part two is often how can they leverage those strengths in the job that they're in today? How do they frame the current job, their current role, and bring their strengths to that current job and current role? It's not all about leaving something and going into something new. It's about reframing. It's about shifting the paradox, you know? And part 3 is then helping people understand that, you know, you have acres of diamonds beneath your feet. There's an awesome book metaphor about acres of diamonds, and the
Oh,
guy
yeah.
goes, right, and spends his whole life traveling the world to find acres, find diamonds. And sure enough, the old plot of land that he lived on had acres of diamonds beneath his feet. He's never dug. This idea of like right here in your job.
That's the George Bailey thing too, right? And it's a
Yeah.
wonderful life. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. It's right here. And just kind of this idea of going, let me reframe. Here's how I can bring my passions, my goals, my aspirations, my strengths to my current role. And the reframing of there's 20% of everyone's job that they dislike. And they may think it's even more than 20. They may think it's 50 or 70 or 80 on your job.
If you're
But
customer service, it might be 80 because no one's calling in because they're happy.
yeah, exactly. There's some tough jobs out there for sure. But being able to reframe it to go, okay, truly, if I look at it, is there 20% of the job that is everyone's job? And that's why they call it job and work, because you're going to get paid to do it. No matter who's, I love this. Look at celebrities, look at professional athletes, and you get them in candid moments and they're complaining about the red carpet and complaining about the travel and complaining about yeah. It's like, no matter what you do in life, there's 20% that's like, oh, I got to do that. Right.
It's
I gotta go.
part of growing up, right? It's like,
Yeah.
what do you think is perfect? It doesn't exist.
It doesn't exist.
Yeah.
And that's why the world rewards you with money. They say, here, thank you for doing that. So being able to go, okay, that's cool. I know that I can't get rid of all of the things I don't like, but how can I make sure that I am stepping into what I've identified as things that get me motivated and are important to me, and apply that in the job that I sit in today? And it can change everything, and this just popped in my mind. Lou Holtz had this story, and he perhaps took it from someone else, but they talked about the the street sweeper, and there were, 3 street sweepers, and they were working actually on a job site where they were building a cathedral. And the one street sweeper, the guy walked up and said, "What are you doing?" And he goes, "I'm sweeping these streets." I said, "Okay. What about you? What are you doing?" "I'm making $15 an hour." And the third, he said, "What are you doing?" And he said, "I'm cleaning the foundation for a beautiful cathedral that's going to be built on this spot that people are going to bring families and generations will worship here for the next 1,000 years." And it's like the reframing of the same task. Who of those 3 do you think was doing the best job,
Exactly.
sweeping? And
Best
wow,
job and happiest about it.
happiest about it. So it's this whole power of purpose piece too, to
Yeah.
help people, figure out.
There's dignity in all work. If it's worth somebody paying you to do something, there's inherent dignity there because it's something that has to be done. You're serving somebody. And then what you just pointed to, I love that story because it sort of shows you connecting to what are the real ramifications. Again, whenever I think about this, I always think of It's a Wonderful Life because, George Bailey has this big dream. He's looking for the diamonds elsewhere in the world, and he feels like it's robbed because he has to stay out of obligation in Bedford Falls. And is suicidal by the end of it because of all the things that have gone wrong, and gets that gift of seeing what would have happened if he had chosen a different path. And it was literally heaven and hell differential almost that much. And I think there's a lot of truth to that in all of our worlds, right? There's truth both. We can create that ripple effect of good, but then I always think it'd be interesting to tell that story from the perspective of Potter, where what if there was no Potter? And what would
Yeah.
Bedford Falls be, right? And that might be a completely different thing. So it's not that we're inherently going to be this creator of all good, and if we take away it, the ripple effects, just everything crumbles. I do believe that is the basic human condition because we are social creatures, but things do go and can go wrong, and we can be centers of discord and harm and have ripple effects in that way as well. But I love the wisdom that you just shared there with the idea of framing, and how we think about things does have an effect on our attitude.
Yeah. And I think agree with all that. And there's an interesting tie in too with, the events of the world and the events in our lives and the events and the circumstances of which that we are subject to. And, Stoic wisdom and various authors over the course of time and century have written about, controlling the controllables and letting go of what is outside of the controllable. And this idea that like
A lot of
life is
wasted
gonna,
energy.
yeah, life is gonna unfold in front of us, and there's gonna be circumstances that we didn't anticipate. And our reaction and our thoughts and attitude about those circumstances dictate everything. They dictate the result and they dictate, oftentimes the outcome. So kind of viewing things in a more objective perspective and not personalize this happened to me and why is this happening to me and why is the traffic backing me up and why is this line slowing me down, to this idea that life is going to unfold how life is going to unfold, and traffic will be there and lines will be there. And what and how can you plug into that? How can you go with the flow of life rather than be in resistance to life and in resistance to every single circumstance because it's not unfolding the way you want it to unfold?
If nothing else, it's a tremendous waste of energy. If nothing else, you can't control that person who's leaving that huge gap on a left turn that only two people got in when 10 were in line, right? Could have gotten through.
Absolutely. And
Yep.
it can really like take a lot of pressure off. It can take a lot of internal frustration, pressure, anxiety, and angst out of the picture because you start realizing, look, it's going to be my reaction and the circumstances are what they are. And how am I going to leverage this circumstance and maybe get the most out of it?
To wrap that line of kind of reasoning that you put out there, Jim, it sounds to me like it's the process of growing up, of maturity, right? Of coming into acceptance of what's real, acceptance of what matters more than what, and getting aligned in with those recognitions that come with that greater sort of cognitive processing power to be able to see, okay, this matters, this doesn't. I'm now more disciplined to be able to put my energy towards the things that matter that I can control, and I'm minimizing the effect of, we call in the model here, we call those loops, energies that fold back in and of themselves. And we're just we're on the exercise bike and we're trying to go down the road, but we're not really going anywhere.
Yeah.
That's what I hear you pointing to. So my question that comes to mind with that, since you pointed that out, is how did you personally come to be able to see this? I mean, I've heard in this conversation already that you've pointed to books and wisdoms that have been probably part of your development. But my guess is you also had relationships, because you pointed to that earlier. People grow through relationships. That's why we call our company the Mentor Machine, because mentoring is growth through relationship, and that's how we humans do best. So I'm wondering about your personal walk now, because
Yeah.
from my perspective, you're sort of far down the road compared to what I'll call most people I talk to. So how? Like, what is it
Yeah.
you saw and that you've seen all that?
I'll give you two or three tactics that I do in terms of like literally in practice, but I'll lead off with this concept and then I'll move to the tactics. What's interesting is this concept. And I think Brene Brown, famous author, and she has a TED talk that's phenomenal on vulnerability. She's one of the thought leaders kind of in this space. I mean, I kind of pull some of that into what I'm about to share, of this idea that we are fallible, that we have a lot to learn, that we need coaching, we need advice, we need we need to learn, like this idea of, growth mindset, is something that I think people have to be open to. And I feel like that society and humanity, in a way, have made it a challenge for one, people to have a growth mindset, and two, be vulnerable enough to want to have a growth mindset because there's something out there that says you should have it figured out.
Yeah. In our system, we point towards humility, the necessary humbleness. If you're going to be great, you also have to have humble. If you're going to be great in the sense that we're talking about,
Yeah.
it's required. But keep going. I don't want to do.
Yeah. Humility is a great adjective that fits right into this, right? It's this idea that there's more to learn and there's people you can learn from, there's books you can learn from. This just that overall idea of coachability, I think is step one. And just conceptually being okay with it doesn't matter what age you are. There's always something that you can learn. There's always another level. There's always the next thing.
I want to comment on that just real
Yeah.
quick, but I don't want to take you off
I love it.
So I'm in my 60s now, and I'm in my younger years in growing up, I always thought that by this time I'll be, and I called that. I actually wrote a song lyric about it called "The Lines." I always thought there was this line that you get to, and what you learn as you grow up and you get older is like there's no line. No matter how far you go, there's always more. And that's because the world is inconveniently complex. You're never going to get there.
Yeah.
Our little minds are never going to get the full picture. So yeah,
Yeah, for sure. Exactly. And being okay with that and that realization. And I think this idea and the way it translates in business is, people, professionals, men and women, anyone past the age of, call it 18 years old in business feel like, hey, I'm in this job. I should know what I'm doing. I should be perfect. I should execute perfectly. It's the default. And it's like, first off, no one executes perfectly in anything in life. No one does. You're going to make mistakes. Second off, this idea that you have it all figured out and you shouldn't need any feedback.
Mm,
And any bit of feedback is a threat
yeah.
to your security, your personal worth, your competency. You've got to get past that feeling and let that go.
Ego protection circuit.
Ego protection circuit.
Yeah.
And wow, you're going to critique my PowerPoint? Wow. How dare you're, unreasonable.
Yeah.
Hey, look, two eyes, two sets of, two brains are better than one. Like if you put this slide in front of this slide and tweak that bullet point, I think it's going to be a clearer presentation. That should not be a threat to your personal competency and identity. And I think helping people in business in particular realize that coaching's okay. The best CEOs in the world have coaches. Your whole business is built on coaching. The best athletes in the world have coaches. Like it's, sports is a great metaphor for a lot of business, right? You look over there and you go, it'd be ridiculous. You never would see a team without a coach. Well, then why do you think as an adult, you need no feedback after you graduate from college? Zero input. So that is
It's really, when you lay it out like that, it's pretty silly. It really is.
yeah, right. Like, hey, after 21, I should have it all figured out. Let's go. And, as a team, real life experience, we worked hard at it, 6 years I've been and the first 3 of really breaking down the vulnerability and getting to that humble, vulnerable spot with each other to say, look, this is a safe, you're psychologically safe here, but I'm going to have a point of view and you're going to have a point of view. And our points of view together will formulate probably the best path. And let's actually bring their point of view in and their point of view in so that we even refine the product, the path, the idea even further. And guess what? It doesn't mean it's a criticism of you, of your path, of your thinking. It's called collaboration. And this is how it's going to work, right? So that's a long wind up to, tactically, Tom, part of my morning routine, 30 minutes every day, various books. There's a bookshelf, behind me here. I rotate between 10 to 12 different books, just reading, half a page out of each. And it's not with any necessarily like it's always this book, this book, this book, this book in this order, but it's 30 minutes dedicated over the course of 30 years to a practice to try to ingest some of the wisdom of the ages that are out there. There's people that dedicated their entire life and put it into a book that you can buy for $17. Their entire life experience everything they've gleaned, they've distilled into 200 pages. If you're willing to pick it up and read, and, you know, hey, sitting down, reading a book cover to cover, that's not what we're talking about here. It's bite-sized micro learning. And, in the current rotation, Ryan Holiday is one of the authors that I think has a lot of neat titles and books out there. He's really brought, the Stoic wisdom to the modern, kind of the modern, he modernized that philosophy, but that amongst, many other titles and authors, Michael Singer's another that has come out with several books that I think would be pretty mind blowing for folks. And even going back to a classic that I mentioned, Psycho-Cybernetics is a really weird name, but Maxwell Maltz wrote that book in 1960. It's birthed the self development industry, and it's the first on identity psychology. First book ever written. His profession was a plastic surgeon. He was an MD, so he wasn't even in the space. He wrote the book in his 60s.
Hmm.
But he had gathered all of this through his work as a plastic surgeon. What intrigued him, Tom, is he would work on somebody and fix whatever the disfigurement was. And they'd look in the mirror and they say, "You didn't fix it. I still look ugly, or I still feel this." And
Yeah.
he realized it was inside, and it was this identity piece, and made it a second half life work in understanding and unlocking that. And if you can kind of get that piece right, a lot of other things can happen for you. But that is a foundational book. If it's not in someone's library, I encourage them. And just having a routine is important. And I think you have to have the openness to start, and then you have a routine. And then I have, a whole series of seeking spirituality. So there's a whole, spiritual, I think, part of this equation that's important. Regardless of your religion or doctrine practice, are you seeking your spirituality? And that will take different forms for different people, but I strongly encourage people to try to find that, because that right there is, that's foundational piece. If you can continue to pursue, that part of your life.
Well, I think that true humility is almost impossible without that component, really. It's very difficult, let's put it that way, without that spiritual side of things where you realize you're part of a whole, you're not the whole.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Right. And being comfortable in that and being okay with that. And that feeling comforting rather than that feeling overwhelming or uncomfortable.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing I wanted to ask you about that. So in your discipline, you sort of pick little snippets here and there is what I was getting. And I kind of do something similar. And I want to see if you notice what I notice. Isn't it amazing that no matter what snippet you choose, it almost is immediately applicable either to that day or that week? It's like almost anything you pull is like, wow, how did I happen to read that? And it happens to work in this conversation. Like, how often does that happen? It's crazy.
It happens way more than someone would think. Yeah.
Yeah.
1,000%. And Tom, the other really fascinating thing too is different authors, different time periods, different orientations, spiritual, non-spiritual, philosophy, business, and then you start seeing these threads.
Yeah.
And you go, wait a minute,
Yeah.
that author's calling it this author's calling it that, this author's calling it this is where this is coming from, but the essence of the thread is this.
Well, when I think of it, that particular thing, I think because we are beings of limited perceptive power, we are consigned to having to use models to navigate through the world. That's we actually we use seems like in what psychology cutting edge right now thinks is we actually think in narrative form. We think in stories down to almost our building blocks are almost stories. So we have to kind of use proxies to navigate the world. And then the proxies that tend to work best tend to start lining up. So that's why I think you observe what you just observed. It doesn't matter whether it's 1, 2, 3, red, white, and blue, eagle, lion. It doesn't matter how you tell the story. It's the thread and arc of the story, and the point of the story is where the gold nuggets of wisdom that help us navigate to either more efficiently, with less pain, with the ability to unlock more of our gifts, whatever the currency is that we're pointing to, is directly tied to the quality of our narratives and our stories. And that's why
Yeah.
it's so important for what you're pointing to is to expand your narrative. Because if you're just going to do it all by yourself, your experience, boy, that's a long walk. It's going to take you a long, long time to when you could take the shortcuts in the way you just described. Just learn from other people. It's way better.
Yeah. 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 I love that. I love that story element, Tom. And I fully agree. Jim Lair wrote a book, The Power of Story,
Yeah.
and he did a phenomenal job of tying to psycho-cybernetics and Maxwell Walt's work of, that story, that narrative, that self-identity, that self-image that story narrates around is all powerful. I mean, it's the arc of our life, and it becomes, we will act in ways accordance to our story. We will view the world in accordance to our story. And, if you're not open to any other input from 20 years old to the time you die, to your point, it's a really long walk to interpret and impact this world with almost, a very singular view. So, just inviting conversations that are interesting. Obviously, listeners to this, are on the track of trying to develop and learn more, but being open to that space is so huge and has been foundational for me.
That's fantastic. And it sounds to me like we're kind of doing a nice natural arc here of sort of drawing our conversation into a close. We're coming up close to time, I know. So is there any other sort of stray thought that you have, Jim, that you kind of want to share before we sort of wrap it up?
Look, I think I would just encourage, we kind of ended on a more tactical note, which I think is great. I think we talked about a lot of neat concepts. If there's any takeaway, would love to for somebody to, start the practice of picking up a couple books and doing some type of routine that, you know, start 3 days a week, move to 5 days a week, start 1 day a week, move to 4 days a week, like, make it something that's part of your 2026. And as you probably, Tom, do and are aware, there's things you can build on it. There's visualization, there's affirmation, there's goal setting, there's lots of things that you can build into that morning routine. But if they start with nothing else but just, picking up a couple books that, they've wanted to read, they've maybe are sitting on their bookshelf, or, reach out to Tom Yu about different titles. There's plenty of authors out there that have put thousands of hours into distilling what they have to offer, and it can really start unlocking some things for you. It would be a neat takeaway.
I appreciate that very much. I think that's great advice, Jim. So thank you so much. I'd also add that like listening to conversations like we're having. So,
Yes.
this podcast is about that, expanding people's power. And, so any way you can get it, there's something magical about the written word. I don't want to detract from that point, because when you're in the written word, you're really kind of getting into the mind of the author, and you're allowing your own mind to unlock in its interpretive power. And there's something a little different about that than the other forms, I think. So I think that's great advice. So appreciate that so much.
Yeah.
Jim, thanks, man. I really enjoyed this conversation. I think it's super valuable. I think we hit the nail right on the head. So thanks again for joining me.
Yeah, Tom, thanks for having me. This was awesome. I feel like that hour went by that quick,
It
right?
went so fast.
Just like before. So,
Well, if you're
um,
willing, I'd love to keep going, and we'll have another time together.
yeah, that sounds good. And listen, have a great holiday, and we'll talk. We'll talk soon.
Thank you very much. Jim, thanks again. I very much appreciate you being on today and loved every second of what you had to say there. The things that to me really stood out were, your experience as somebody in operations for 20 years, and you came into the HR function with eyes wide open about how you in HR, you can serve those needs out of the perspective of how things maybe get underserved. And I think that's a great, if you're listening and you're in HR or aspire to be in HR, or you work with people in HR, this is a very good line of inquiry to pursue. That was fantastic. He talked about a cadence feedback loop. That's something that is super important. And a lot of what Jim shared with us, the discipline of continually opening ourselves to the wisdom of the ages, and wise ideas and perhaps new things. All of that requires us to have some bandwidth. and some openness to a discipline that allows us a daily practice. Jim shared his daily practices 30 minutes in the morning. It sounded to me like it was pretty non-negotiable that he, makes sure that he's feeding his mind and he has his go-to things. If you have that, great, do it more. And I think he was dead on right when he said, if you're sort of never do anything like that, maybe we don't start at 30 minutes a day every morning. Maybe you do reading Friday or reading Monday or something that is in the mentor machine, we call them sustained incremental actions, something that you can and will do. You commit to it, something you can keep doing. It almost even doesn't matter what it is, as long as it's something new and something that feeds you and creates a new pattern, then it counts and it'll work. So that's tremendous wisdom. So I'd say that's the number one thing, that if you take anything away, that's the thing to do, is to look around you with a little bit of, perhaps you can ask yourself, is there a place where maybe I could be more humble, where I'm making a lot of assumptions or I'm making things I think I know, but perhaps I could learn more. So you ask another question, something like that. I think that's the kind of mindset that leads to the kind of success that Jim has brought not only to himself, but to many people around him, which I think is even the more valuable aspect of just what that little discipline can do. So thank you very much for everybody for listening. And thank you again to Jim. Appreciate it. And hopefully see you again next on The Eye of Power. This has been the Eye of Power podcast with Tom Dardick. I'd like to thank you for listening. I'd also like to thank my brother, Scott Dardick, for the music and his music production. If you'd like to reach me, simply email Tom at dardickcommunications.com.